I can still taste the irony in the air whenever I walk into a place like this. The clink of crystal glasses, the low hum of laughter, the polished shine of mahogany tables. It all feels like déjà vu. Only this time, I'm not the one trying to make myself small. I'm the one everyone's watching. My name is Emily Carter, and tonight I'm seated at the very restaurant where, years ago, someone told me I couldn't even afford dinner. Their voices had echoed in my head long after I left that night, bruised but not broken. Now, as I adjust the cuff of my silk blouse and smooth the fabric against my wrist, the memory tastes almost sweet. From my corner table, I can see them, familiar faces, some older, some grayer, waiting, expecting me to walk in like a guest, maybe even a client desperate for their approval. They don't know yet. They have no idea. My phone buzzes against the table. A message from my assistant, Michael. Everything's set. The board knows you'll make the announcement tonight. I let the phone rest in my hand, staring at the words. My heart doesn't race anymore. It beats steady, deliberate, like a drum announcing its own power. I smile, sip my. I was 21 the first time I sat in this restaurant. Back then, I wasn't wearing silk or confidence. I was wearing the only black dress I owned, one I bought on clearance at a department store in Cincinnati before I moved here to New York. The seams scratched against my skin, and the heels I borrowed from my roommate pinched with every step. Still, I thought I looked presentable enough until they reminded me otherwise. It was a Friday night. My college classmates had invited me out, most of them coming from families with last names that opened doors I didn't even know existed. Trust funds, internships arranged by family friends, vacations in Italy. They spoke a language I couldn't keep up with. I remember sitting at that long table, the menu trembling slightly in my hands. My heart sank as I scanned the prices. $45 for an entree. $30 for an appetizer. I had $26 in my bank account and a credit card already maxed out from textbooks. When the waiter came, I quietly ordered a glass of water, saying I wasn't that hungry. But I wasn't invisible. One of the guys, Daniel Thompson, his father owned half the real estate downtown, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "What's the matter, Emily? Can't afford dinner?" he said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. The laughter that followed was sharp, metallic, the kind that slices skin before you realize you're bleeding. My throat tightened. My hands shook so badly, I had to set the menu down. I wanted to defend myself, to shout that I had dreams, that I wasn't going to be poor forever. But the words jammed in my chest like splinters. Then I felt a touch on my arm. It was Mrs. Jennings, a retired professor who had always believed in me. She joined us that night as a guest, invited by one of the students she mentored. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the noise. "Don't let small minds measure your worth, Emily," she whispered. Then she slipped something into my palm, a small silver coin, tarnished but smooth. "My grandmother gave this to me when I had nothing. She told me, hold on to it and remember, wealth isn't money. It's the fire that keeps you moving." I clutched that coin all night. I didn't eat. I didn't fight back. But when I walked out of the restaurant, the city air sharp and cold against my face, I made a promise to myself. One day, I wouldn't just afford dinner. I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. The years that followed weren't glamorous. They weren't the kind of years you post on Instagram with smiling filters and shiny milestones. They were gritty, sleepless, hungry years, the kind that scrape you raw until you either break or build yourself into someone unrecognizable. I worked 2 jobs after graduation, mornings at a coffee shop, nights answering phones at a logistics company. By the time I crawled into my bed, the city outside already buzzing toward morning, my body felt like it was made of sand. Still, I studied. I read business books borrowed from the library, listened to free lectures online, and scribbled notes about supply chains and market trends while sipping reheated coffee. There were nights I stared at the silver coin Mrs. Jennings had given me, running my thumb across its grooves, reminding myself, keep moving. Fire doesn't die unless you let it. I started small, reselling thrifted clothes online, flipping used furniture I found on curbsides. It wasn't much, but when I made my first $100 profit, it felt like the world shifted beneath my feet. The real turning point came when I met Margaret Lane, a seasoned entrepreneur in her late 50s who owned a small but successful catering business. I met her because I answered an ad for part-time help washing dishes. She was the first person who didn't just see me as cheap labor, she saw my hunger to learn. "Emily," she said one night while we scrubbed pans together, "you've got the kind of grit people can't buy. Stick with me, and I'll show you how to turn it into gold." And she did. Margaret taught me how to negotiate with vendors, how to balance books, how to pitch an idea, without flinching. She also taught me the subtler lessons, the power of walking into a room like you belong there, the discipline of saying no, the art of listening more than speaking. I saved every extra dollar I made, pouring it into a dream I kept locked away from everyone who once laughed at me. My classmates posted glamorous updates, new cars, vacations, engagement rings. I posted nothing. I didn't want them to know. Not yet. When Margaret retired, she handed me the reins of her catering company. By then, I had already been reinvesting profits into restaurant stocks. Quietly, carefully, I built a portfolio. I learned about private equity. I found mentors in unexpected places, an accountant who slipped me advice after hours, a chef who told me which chains were struggling and ripe for acquisition. I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing freedom, the kind of freedom where no one could ever lean across a table and laugh about what I couldn't afford. The night I signed my first deal as a silent partner in a restaurant group, I celebrated alone. No champagne, no confetti. Just me in my tiny apartment, eating leftover pasta and staring at that silver coin on the table. Step by step, deal by deal, the girl who once couldn't buy dinner became the woman building an empire. I saved every extra dollar I made, pouring it into a dream I kept locked away from everyone who once laughed at me. My classmates posted glamorous updates, new cars, vacations, engagement rings. I posted nothing. I didn't want them to know. Not yet. When Margaret retired, she handed me the reins of her catering company. By then, I had already been reinvesting profits into restaurant stocks. Quietly, carefully, I built a portfolio. I learned about private equity. I found mentors in unexpected places, an accountant who slipped me advice after hours, a chef who told me which chains were struggling and ripe for acquisition. I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing freedom, the kind of freedom where no one could ever lean across a table and laugh about what I couldn't afford. The night I signed my first deal as a silent partner in a restaurant group, I celebrated alone. No champagne, no confetti. Just me in my tiny apartment, eating leftover pasta and staring at that silver coin on the table. Step by step, deal by deal, the girl who once couldn't buy dinner became the woman building an empire. And no one, not even Daniel Thompson, had the faintest idea. The restaurant was buzzing that night, the chandeliers scattering golden light across polished wine glasses, the aroma of rosemary and garlic drifting through the air. I chose the same corner table where I once sat humiliated, only now the weight of the moment felt entirely different. My heels clicked against the marble floor, not borrowed or uncomfortable this time, but perfectly fitted Louboutins that carried me like armor. Across the room, I spotted them. Daniel Thompson among them, older now but with the same smug curve to his mouth. A handful of my former classmates and acquaintances sat around the table, their voices carrying the same arrogance I remembered. They were here for a business dinner, though none of them knew the true host. When I approached, the chatter quieted. Their eyes widened slightly, flicking from my tailored suit to the quiet confidence in my stride. "Emily Carter?" Daniel said, his tone caught somewhere between surprise and skepticism.
Wow.
"It's been a long time." I smiled politely, taking my seat at the head of the table. "It has." One of them leaned forward. "So, what do you do these days?" I let the question hang in the air, savoring the moment. The truth was heavy on my tongue, but I wasn't ready to drop it yet. I glanced around at the room, at the paintings on the walls, the polished silverware, the soft leather chairs. All of it mine, though they didn't know. The waiter approached. "Miss Carter, would you like us to begin service?" Their heads snapped toward me. "Ms. Carter." The subtle respect in his voice didn't escape them. "Yes, please," I said, casually setting my phone beside my glass. A notification glowed. Board confirmation complete. Ownership transferred. The first course arrived, and the conversations grew awkward. They tried to probe, tossing questions masked as small talk. "Are you married? Still working in catering? Living in the city?" I gave them vague answers, watching them fidget, sensing their confusion. Finally, Daniel chuckled. "I've got to admit, Emily, back in the day, I didn't think you'd make it very far. You left quite an impression, though. Remember that night here?" His smirk widened. "Couldn't even afford dinner." The words hung in the air like smoke. My chest didn't tighten this time. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt a calmness, deep and steady, rising in me. "Yes," I said softly, setting down my fork. "I remember." Silence fell over the table. Every pair of eyes fixed on me. I leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, and let the truth unfold like a story I'd been saving for this exact moment. You see, that night was the last time anyone laughed at me for what I couldn't afford. I promised myself it would never happen again. I let my gaze sweep across the table. And now it won't. Because you're sitting in a restaurant chain I own. Every branch, every chair you're sitting on, every meal you'll order tonight, it's under my name. The shock rippled through them instantly. Forks clattered. One man blinked, his jaw slack. Another woman covered her mouth, stifling a gasp. Daniel's smirk collapsed into disbelief. You own this place?" he stammered. "This place," I corrected, "and the 47 others just like it across the country." Overnight, the deal was finalized. So the next time anyone thinks I can't afford dinner, let's just say, I smiled, tilting my glass toward them. I bought the whole menu. The silence was delicious. It stretched, heavy with awe and shame. Some looked away. Some stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. And for the first time, I wasn't the girl at the end of the table with empty pockets. I was the woman at the head, owning the table itself. They didn't know where to look. Some stared down at their plates, others at me, as though trying to reconcile the broke girl they once ridiculed with the woman now holding their futures in her palm. Daniel cleared his throat first, his arrogance slipping into something almost pleading. "Emily, listen. That's wow. Incredible. Really. Maybe we could talk about a partnership?" My firm could. I held up a hand. "Daniel, stop. Tonight isn't about what your firm can do for me. It's about what you're willing to do for yourself." The words sank in, heavy and sharp. I looked around the table, meeting each set of eyes in turn. You mocked me for being poor. You treated my silence as weakness. But what you didn't know is that I was learning. I was storing every insult, every laugh, as fuel. And now, I decide what happens next. The tension was electric. Even the clinking from the other tables seemed distant. I leaned forward. "So here are my conditions." I pointed to Melissa, one of my former classmates who had joined in the laughter years ago. "You always dreamed of writing, didn't you? But you stayed in corporate because it was safer. If you want a contract with my company, you go back to writing. Seriously. No more excuses." Her face flushed red, tears pooling in her eyes. She nodded silently. Then to David, who once bragged about his wealth while mocking others. "You've got talent in finance, but you've used it to exploit, not to build. If you want my support, you redirect your skills toward helping small businesses. Real people. No more predatory deals. Prove you can be better." He swallowed hard. "Yes, Emily. I will." Finally, my eyes landed on Daniel. He tried to hold my gaze, but I could see the unease flickering in his expression. "And you," I said, "you don't get a contract. Not until you learn what humility tastes like. You laughed the loudest that night, Daniel. You taught me a lesson, but it's one you've yet to learn yourself." He flinched, jaw tightening. "That's not fair." I smiled faintly. Life wasn't fair to me either. And yet, here I am. The silence was suffocating. But beneath it, something else stirred, a shift. For the first time, they weren't looking at me with superiority. They were looking at me with recognition, with the awareness that I was no longer the girl begging for scraps of dignity. I softened, just slightly. I don't set these conditions to punish you. I set them because I know what it's like to be underestimated, and I refuse to carry that poison forward. You want my help? Then prove you can change. Prove you can be more than the people who laughed at a girl with $26 in her bank account. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Melissa whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted for good. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect surprised even me. Melissa sent me her first short story draft, a raw, beautiful piece about resilience. David emailed about a new initiative he'd started, offering pro bono financial planning for women-owned startups. Even those who had walked away in silence seemed quieter on social media, humbled, rethinking the lives they had flaunted for so long. Daniel, of course, stayed defiant at first. Pride doesn't crumble overnight. But I heard whispers later that he had taken a step back, started volunteering, maybe trying to prove something to himself. Whether it was genuine or not, I didn't care. The point was clear. The seed had been planted. As for me, I found myself reflecting more often than celebrating. Success didn't erase the scars of humiliation, but it reframed them. What once felt like wounds now looked like lessons carved deep into me. I had built an empire. Yes. But more than that, I had built myself layer by layer, with grit, sleepless nights, and the fire that never died. One evening, after another long meeting, I returned home to my penthouse overlooking the city. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the small silver coin Mrs. Jennings had given me all those years ago. The metal was worn smoother now, the edges softened from years of being held, but it still carried the weight of her words. Wealth isn't money. It's the fire that keeps you moving. I placed it on the table beside my glass of wine and whispered. I kept moving. The city lights glittered outside my window, reflecting back a woman I once could barely imagine becoming. Strong, independent, unshakable. And as I thought back to that night in the restaurant, the laughter, the shame, the sting of their words, I smiled. Because the story didn't end there. It ended here, on my terms, with my voice carrying louder than theirs ever could. I lifted the coin once more, closed my fingers around it, and spoke the final truth aloud, as if to the girl I used to be. They said I couldn't afford dinner. But what they didn't know was that one day, I'd own the whole table.